What job makes the most amount of money for the least amount of work? Story 1. Sometimes in big, fast-growing, fast-moving companies, you can end up in a random WFH job that pays great, and you literally do nothing all day. I think people even forget you are there. It is a strange artifact of the current world we live in, and I can't imagine it lasting forever. But I know a guy who had one of these jobs and was able to also do basically full-time freelance work at the same time that he collected a full-time paycheck and benefits. It lasted for about 2 years until somebody wised up and cut him loose. Story 2. I worked as a night watchman for nearly 30 years. Never made a lot of money, but hardly worked at all. For over 2 decades, I worked one night watchman job where I worked maybe 40 minutes a shift, when the rest I goofed around, including sleep. Story 3. High-level individual contributors in remote positions where their managers only care about deliverables. In layman's terms, they don't manage people, and those they report to only care about the end product. They never miss a deadline, but only work 20 to 30% of their working hours. Story 4. Quality urines folks. Girl I knew in the Navy got out, got her BS in quality urines, makes $450K going around to local industrial plants, inspecting them, sitting in her truck while her subordinates inspect them, and then giving the owner/manager/whomever a paper full of their. Story 5. A lot of remote tech jobs are great gigs. I just left one because the company was so incompetent, but I was able to skate for a year doing much of nothing except video games during the day and got paid bank. Edit. Folks, it's not as good as it seems. Story 6. I remember reading here about someone who got hired by a large corporation to work on a team. When he arrives for work, the office is empty, but the thinks must be a WFH day. Turns out his whole team had gotten let go. Apparently his paperwork hadn't made it to the unit that decided to let the team go. So he just sat there in his cubicle for a few months, doing his own thing when he posted about it. At the time of the post, he still had his job and was wondering how long it would last. No idea about the eventual outcome. Story 7. I work as a client services director in the market research industry. This is a 6-figure job that mostly involves emails and phone calls. Highly recommend. I also worked as a professional chef for 12 plus years. This is hard work that will wreck your body, knees, sleep patterns, social life, and temperament. The pay sucks. The benefits are non-existent. Hollywood spins this as romantic. It's not. Avoid. In my experience, art director, my mother is an artist and graphic designer, is fairly low stress. These people can make a very good living if working in marketing or graphic design. My wife is a school teacher. This jobbing sucks. Long hours, thankless, garbage pay, constant disrespect, emotional turmoil, and the pay sucks balls. Avoid. I would say musician is the easiest job. My grandfather was an acoustic guitar maker, Spanish folk musician, and instructor. He made a great living and traveled the world. He died in a nice house playing guitar. Peaceful and easy life. My 2 cousins and their mother are also musicians and have a good living off their musical talent. One of these cousins played on a few records as a session player and has been getting steady checks for decades. His mother sang background vocals on a few songs and likewise has collected checks for years without any further effort. The downside is being a musician is a dime a dozen. You need luck, talent, persistence, or a combination of each to make a decent wage off music. But it is the easiest in terms of labor. Story 8. I was a radar testing engineer at Raytheon for most of a year. Got paid about $65,000 a year to sit there and watch YouTube. Occasionally, I'd look up at a wall of blinking lights and make sure they were all blinking, then nod. Then look at a wall of not blinking lights and make sure they were all not blinking. Then nod. Then go back to YouTube. If any light was doing what it wasn't supposed to, the order of operations was sad head shake. 2. Tut-tut bad test. 3. Run the one-line script to turn it off. 4. Pull the MIV power levers to turn it off. 4B, optional, declare pull the lever cronk. 5. Wait a minute. 6. Pull the MIV power levers to turn it on. 6B, optional, declare pull the lever cronk. 7. Run the one-line script to turn it on. 8. Check the lights. That's it. That's all I did. People at work were expressing their jealousy of me because it was one of the golden goose positions that I'd gotten as a not-quite college new hire. So-called because it's a low-effort job that scales its pay well over time, and short of committing literal treason, you can stay in that post until retirement. At first I joked around with them, but 6 months in, I had to put on a fake smile and keep myself from saying, yeah, it's a great job that's so completely and utterly meaningless that each day I find fewer and fewer reasons not to drive my car straight into the barriers on my drive to and from work. So I quit, got a master's degree in video game programming, and got a job working on literally my favorite title. Story 9. My job. Walk backwards into like 10 hours of work remote and 6 figures in a career that's traditionally known to not be a blow-off. I'd argue most job titles can lead to your description, but will depend on who you work for and what their expectations are versus your current skills. Story 10. I worked as a customer success manager for a Fortune 500 for 2 years and made $180K. It was the easiest job in the world because product worked and people loved it. Customers wouldn't even talk to me because of how much it worked. Unfortunately, I was part of an AM layoff earlier this year, but could have kept milking that. Story 11. It helps to work for people who don't really know what you do. I'm a technical writer and I can work about 4 times faster than anyone thinks I can. So most weeks I can get a week's work done in 10 to 15 hours and still have lots of juice left to occasionally crank something out in record time when there's an emergency. The pay is somewhere between okay and pretty good, but the work-life balance is amazing. It also helps that I enjoy this kind of writing. It's like getting paid to do crosswords. Story 12. My corrections officer friend told me about a job in the prison he works at. If a member of the dog squad is unable to look after their dog because of sickness or injury, then the dog gets looked after on site. It's some guy's job to walk a dog twice a day and pick up after it for $900 a day. Story 13. Repairing computers. I posted flyers advertising myself for PC repairs when I was 17 around my suburb. People were more than happy to pay $120 for it. All you do is back up their personal files, reformat, install a fresh Windows, and then copy their files back. And while that's doing its thing, have a nap, play some games, watch a movie. I had one woman who paid me $60 to fix her solitaire shortcut from her desktop. Story 14. Data center union electrician. You take notes, do pretend failures to develop procedures, sit around mostly. Paid to know how to fix things when hits the fan. Except when it does hit the fan, you just get a contractor to fix it instead while watching football or something. Source, I actually do the work for like 1/3 of the money. Story 15. Fire battalion chief. Drive your own SUV to fires whilst getting a hard-on for living out your childhood fantasies. Bark orders at the guys in the business end of a hose. Push papers. Collect paycheck with cushy early retirement whilst telling friends and neighbors how dangerous your job is. Story 16. In tech, from what I can see, it would easily be the dedicated scrum master for a team of even semi-competent devs. You run a couple of meetings a day where you basically ask a series of cookie-cutter questions, move a couple of cards in a Jira board, and then log off. If the devs aren't all brand new, they figure their own blockers out anyways. After that, it's probably solution architect. Just take a list of requirements and draw up some incomprehensible architectural diagrams, using at least 3 new technologies 10 years ahead of where the devs actually operate in the current solutions. Drop it on them like you would a microphone at the end of a rap battle and moonwalk out of the team's call. Story 17. My brother played softball with a guy who sold equipment to hospitals and pharmaceutical companies. A typical day for him was going to lunch with clients. He gets paid over $100K a year. Probably even more now, considering a lot of his bosses have retired since I met him 12 years ago. Story 18. As a first job for teenagers, I always recommend delivering pizza. You don't make as many tips as you would as a server necessarily, but out of an 8-hour shift, you're going to spend 5 or 6 of those hours sat on your in a car listening to music. Sometimes you have to work in the kitchen, but only when it's slow, because if it's busy, you always have a drive to take. You literally get to be outside of your workplace during the tightest times to be there. Your income isn't stable, but it rarely dips below $25 an hour and can get as high as $40 an hour. Also, you always have a good mix of cash to limit how often you have to use money in your bank account. Biggest drawback is wear and tear on your car. I end up driving about 40,000 miles a year. That's a lot of oil changes and an almost yearly tire change. Story 19. I work for a software company as a project manager for infrastructure and enterprise architecture. From the PM side, I manage about 4 onboarding projects which don't have any strict deadlines. I work from home and not micromanaged. I make awesome money with bonuses and the work isn't stressful. Now, mind you, it took me years to get here, but it doesn't have to. Story 20. I'm a project manager for a company that doesn't want anything a project manager can do outside of schedule meetings and find things occasionally that they can't find. I don't even have to take notes anymore because I convinced them to let me use a transcriber on every call. I'm getting really good at chess and starting to learn Spanish in my spare time, of which there is plenty. I am constantly paranoid, but I'm told often that they couldn't survive without me. I literally took a second job remotely this summer, and they had no idea. I do have great soft skills, and I'm a great PM when needed, in my opinion anyway. I just am at a weird company who both thinks I'm invaluable and at the same time has no clue how to use me. I set up a complete PMO process and standards, SDLC the lot, and I offered weekly reports and was eventually told they don't want them and don't want to follow any process and to just keep them on track and report when I think is hitting the fan. Story 21. College professor, specifically at elite private schools. I have a family member who makes close to $300K a year, has subsidized housing, and works maybe 10, 15 hours a week. And 90% of the work is completely flexible, like doing research in his PJs at home. He has to teach 1 CL 1 semester per year, so mid-Jan, mid-May, and that's the bulk of the workload. Everything else is faculty meetings here and there, and research. He had to go through an insane amount of schooling to get there, but no debt, and now it's gravy. Story 22. Sometimes I feel like it's me. Then I remember that just because I'm not doing the work I intended to do, I'm still doing work. I've been in some form of IT or telecom most of my career, and now I'm kind of in management. I do almost all of my work placating people on conference calls. It's hard for me to realize that what I'm doing is work, but I'm getting good feedback and I'm truly helping things move along and get done. It's hard to understand. Story 23. It's more about the business. I'm making $125K plus, and I just went to Korean BBQ, got ice cream, and am now playing Pictionary with the team. I might watch a video essay and dick about in Blender later. Find a business that's medium-sized and going through a lot of transition, desperate to retain staff. Management will spend a lot of time dicking about amongst themselves, leaving little to no time to give you work. Any work you do for them, they think is amazing. You ace your performance reviews, rinse and repeat while making the big bucks. Story 24. $100,000 to refill some hot foods at events. The job pays mine wage, but the clients like Google, MLB, NFL, etc. pays 10, 15 million for the event and has a mandatory 20% tip that is given the staff. Split evenly, no sonority at all. Job is stupid easy. Stand around and talk to guests or co-workers and maybe do actually work about half the shift and get fed like a king. Story 25. Executive leadership. I'm a fractional CTO for a dozen PE portfolio companies. I have 2 330-minute meetings a day, and nearly 90% of my day is spent BSing about cars, politics, and investments. Plus, I work from home and set my own schedule. It's ridiculously stupid. I produce zero value, yet am set to receive a substantial YOI bonus because I led a successful divestiture. Story 26. As far as reasonably attainable jobs go, mine. The job is slightly complicated to explain, so I'll break it down. Federal agency that doesn't exactly specialize in security requires their federal buildings to be secured by guards. Federal agency doesn't want to deal with all the details to make that happen, so they contract private companies to manage security at their buildings across the country. Private companies bid for security contracts where the agency will pay them to basically run the security department at the various sites. These companies screen and hire guards who go through the background check process with Homeland/NSA/whoever else is /interested. It's such a complicated process. I genuinely do not know who actually investigated me, only that they went so deep they actually talked to old neighbors I haven't seen in years. Once the alphabet agencies give the green light and you pee your medical, you begin working at the site you applied for from the private company. Day to day, it feels like you just work for the federal agency, because that's who's actually at your site where you work, but technically you work for the private company, who picks wages, benefits, schedules, etc. Here's the kicker. The federal government is very well known for taking good care of its people, and that usually, and in this case, means you get taken well care of. My site also has a union, so the private contract company isn't skimming an unfair amount off the top of the federal contract, and a lot of it makes its way down to the guards. And that's the best part. I'm paid $30.50/hour in an average cost of living area. I don't do as far as job duties go. I sit in a secluded little guard hut, push a garage door opener when people come to get let in after scanning their badges to verify they have access, and patrol the small site twice a shift, which takes like 30 minutes total. And that's it. I am left to my own devices to keep myself entertained, so I don't really get bored. $30.50 an hour to pretty much just not be at home. As an added bonus, the site is pretty entertaining to watch. Story 27. I was a defense contractor for a while and did aircraft avionics maintenance. There were other contractors there to handle specialized cliffide payloads. Those guys got paid like twice as much as me, which was already a lot, to take a broken payload that I removed from the plane and send it to depot to be fixed. They weren't capable of or expected to fix it on site. They were just a go-between. They didn't even remove the part. I did. Story 28. I made a load as a field tech EIC electrician for a 1,400 PSI gas pipeline. The hazard pay was basically padded onto my income because the kill zone for a rupture at that pressure would level a quarter of a mile and they literally find no trace of you. There's been incidents out west in the past. Had most of my holidays ruined, was on call 24/7, and carried the other two lazy Ed Man Baby employees. Did it for several years and left to be a normal electrician. Much nicer. Story 29, WFH Cloud Engineer. If programming is a black box and parallelism is another black box, the cloud is a third black box. You either work with super geniuses who create infrastructure from scratch that defines the internet, or dumbs that have no clue what it can do and have no business in the industry. The former was incredibly fulfilling and would have paved the way for the rest of my career, but the work was high stress with on-call hours and forced me to live where I didn't want to. I'm working for the latter now. I haven't gotten an assignment in months. I work from home. My managers don't know enough to understand what I do or what I can do, but I just got a raise and bonus, so... Story 30. This is not going to be anywhere close to the top, but it made me think about a cushy position for anyone. I work as a foreman for one of the country's top 10 home building companies. My crew builds trusses and only trusses, gables, valleys, attic framing also. And we have an inspector that comes by twice a year to do a quality check. He's allowed to stop by anytime he wants, unannounced. He is contracted by over 120 companies all over the country. His travel is paid for, and he makes his own schedule. He is an expert in his field, and everyone he interacts with on a daily basis respects his opinion. And all he has to do is show up to construction sites and look at framing. If it pees or fails, is irrelevant to him. His whole day may be doing a 15-minute walkthrough of a facility. He's paid ludicrously and does absolutely zero work. It's 100% one of those jobs where you are paid for what you know, not what you accomplish. Story 31. I knew a guy who was hired as an IT developer, was paid during 6 months, waiting for the paperwork to be done before he was sent to the client premises. Finally, the contract between the employer and the client was never signed. He was fired after 6 months staying home doing nothing. Story 32, B2B software sales. You're brokering huge deals for companies with a lot of money, and most of them already need your software to run their business. So it's like you and one other competitor. It's like shooting fish in a barrel, and you just get to cash my commission checks on top of your already high-tech salary. Story 33. Most upper management positions are like this. I'm what could be considered middle management, and I hardly do anything at least half the time, so I know full well the guy above me ain't doing. Everyone below us works way harder than we do, and we make more money. I mean, I'm at work right now and have spent most of the morning on Reddit. Story 34. Mining. I was climbing the walls with boredom. Walked away from $150 KYR plus free healthcare because I didn't want to waste my life. Picked a much harder and colder job for similar money so I could feel a sense of accomplishment at the end of the day. Government. I work even less now and make closer to $200 KYR with better benefits. Lots of downtime, but also adventure at times. Slightly more rewarding than mining, but not as stressful as ice roads. Story 35. Ideal anything involved with IT, especially if you're not part of anything mission critical. Make over $200K with minimal effort throughout the day. You don't even have to be smart, just mention buzzwords when reporting your status to management. If anyone questions you, just send them a link to some technical document and tell them it's clearly defined here, then go back to doing WE you want. Story 36. Congressman and senator. Consider the fact they don't even have to necessarily show up for votes. If they don't want to, they can just refuse to meet with constituents. And they are about to go on winter break, which is a hilarious thing for children in elementary school and 50, 70-year-olds to have in common. Free healthcare for life, tons of bribes that aren't technically bribes, making $200K a year just to make sure you're more popular than the guy they run against you. Story 37. A tech analyst for a decent firm. You talk about technology and get paid well. You can just research and write and never have to do the public stuff if you want. It's the easiest I've ever had it, and a little bit of insight from being a customer makes you a rock star in the space. Story 38. Movie star. You work for 6 months and get like a $5 million paycheck. And then there's all these rules about how long you're actually allowed to work and how much of a break you need in between shooting and stuff. So they really only work like 10-hour days maximum. Story 39. Hours manager. Mid-level banking, like VP of whatever. Pharmaceutical sales. Software engineering, any remote professional IT job, high-level consulting, riverboat pilots on the Mississippi, retail GM of a large store, Walmart GMS make $140-200K a wire. Even a Best Buy starts at $120K for GM. Helicopter pilot for a sheriff's department. You're not in the air often, but it pays $130K. But marketing director is another one. Story 40. Railroading when it's slow and the extra boards are fat. We get paid to be available to be called in. If we don't get called in, as long as we don't call off, we get paid the guarantee. I think I worked like 8, maybe 9 days last month, and so far this month I've only worked 2. Of course, the flip side to that is when it's busy, it freaking sucks because you're getting work 10 plus hours a day, 6 days in a row before you get a couple days off. Story 41. Pretty much upper management in the majority of industries. More technically falls on their shoulders, but they're typically tied up in pointless meetings or off running personal errands, and when something does get ed up, they find someone else to throw under the bus. There are great executives and administrators out there that still aren't afraid to step in or step up when needed, but it's by no means a requirement most of the time, so most get lazy. Story 42. Goddamn property manager. Yeah, one who says he's taken care of it and didn't. Just sits back and takes his percentage from rent checks from tenants. Grrr, yes, I've heard one should never be an out-of-state landlord. Too hard to check up on, not the tenants, but the property manager. Story 43. I'm a project manager, and if you land the right project, you can get paid a lot to do very little. I'm busy just now, but recently came off a project where, once I'd planned it, it more or less ran itself, and I had a very quiet 12 months where I mostly sat around playing video games and watching films. I was averaging 130. 60-minute meeting a day. And other than that, I just needed to write a couple of progress reports each week. Each report would just be a tweak of the previous report. Before that, I spent 2 years working on a project where I had more meetings, but I stacked them all between 9 and 11 each day and was often finished for the day by 12. I'm busy now, though. 5 hours a day of meetings and plenty to do outside of those calls. It was a nice few years, though. Story 44. Reserve goalkeeper in soccer, football. Basically, the third goalie in a club's depth chart. Manchester City's reserve goalkeeper Scott Carson has been with the team since 2019 and has played in a total of 2 games. Despite the lack of playing time, he's made between $1.30, $1.5 million a year. He's basically there because he's a veteran player who's good for the team culture. Gets paid over $1 million a year to sit on the bench. Story 45 hours. They get paid 6 figures to talk about work. Watching my roommate work from home 3 out of 5 days a week, I just wonder why anyone gets an actual STEM degree. They get paid twice as much as I ever did to wonder if they should hire me to do something that they know nothing about. Story 46. Basically everything even remotely related to financial management. The lower rungs are full of people pulling 80-hour weeks, but the second you get a promotion, it's basically just a giant MLM. Gather ES below you till you find one to promote. Then you get promoted, then rinse and repeat till you have a VP title and work about 4 hours a week, focusing the team on monthly goals or whatever bull they are spewing. Some of these guys are literally bonusing out millions of dollars a year. Story 47. There's a great Reddit comment about this guy who broke his leg and convinced his management to let him work at a satellite office close to his house. Then his entire team got fired, but he kept getting paychecks, so he just kept going to the satellite office for years. He eventually just started taking his PlayStation and hanging out. Story 48. Haha, mine is up there. I'm in my office about 24 hours a week, of which I work about 10 hours and watch YouTube and movies the rest of the time. I'm not a 1% ER, but maybe a 3% ER in terms of income. I own a company that provides consulting services to other businesses. Think something like pension administration, but it's not that. I have a good team that does almost all the work, and they all earn very high salaries. I only ever get stressed out if there's a major problem, which seems to happen about once every 2 years. Story 49. I've seen some live streams where literally nothing is happening. For example, some where the streamer is sleeping, and sometimes not even on camera, VTuber avatar, and yet are actively getting subs. I've seen another that was just a jar of peanut butter in a tray of water. Heck, I could probably go stream the clock on my wall so at least there's some movement, and it'll do better than the streams where I'm actually trying to provide content. Story 50. A lot of tech people don't do much and make 200, 300K. But to get to that, you need to go to a top school and get a lot of experience or find the right niche and be very smart. I work in tech, and there are times where I barely worked and made 120K or so. Now I work pretty hard and make about 200K, but there are people in my group who are senior to me who don't do and make more than I do. There are also people doing multiple tech jobs remotely. Some still work maybe 30 hours a week and make 300, 400K, and some make 500K plus. Realistically, though, most people can't become engineers. You have to be good at math and your brain has to be wired a certain way. Something like 50% of students drop out, so there's never enough engineer, unless there's a recession or something along those lines. But even during a recession, we only have enough engineers due to H-1B. Story 51, culinary director with Aramark or comp at a state-funded correctional facility. I was the assistant director. The company literally gives you every recipe and the order guides and the employees. All I had to do was supervise the staff that they hired. My director didn't lift a finger on anything. Same menu every day, same budget, same lists. He rarely came to the office and I rarely left it. All I did was make the schedule and do inventory once a month. I made $75K and he made $110K. The CD only came in when there were meetings and he knew the regional director would be stopping by. Story 52. Not high paying whatsoever, but a couple years ago I got a seasonal second job at Kroger. I was hired on for the bakery, but the bakery manager was on some kind of leave, so I never saw her. Whoever in the department was tasked with training me basically said, "I can't train you, that's the manager's job." Yet somebody was still putting me on the schedule consistently. So I spent that entire season getting paid to do quite literally nothing. Like I would clock in and just play on my phone in the break room until it was time to leave. Sometimes I would walk circles around the store and make the shelves look a little more organized if I got bored. Somehow, nobody ever noticed or questioned me. Story 53. I am an engineer, and I'm also apparently good at explaining things simply. My boss told me that they needed someone to present my division's project reports to executives who know nothing about how any of our works. I get paid 50% more to do my same job, but also organize and give a presentation to big shareholders and corporate snobs every quarter. I usually take 2 weeks to put the presentation together, and then I spend 2 hours or so giving it at a cushy lunch party. Easy money. Story 54. CEO makes a lot of money, but you have to work a lot to get there. I would say pilots. You take off and land the plane, but that is about 10 minutes work. The rest of the flight is just basically checking if the autopilot is still on, while behind you the stewards are working their ease off for a bare minimum wage. Story 55. I work in a call center for a utility company. I work primarily from home and have to go into the office for meetings. I also have a salary around $100K. I used to only do customer service in the office with forced overtime, and we would usually end the day with 500 plus calls on hold. We only got about a 10-second break between calls, and we were busy all day. I managed to pee one easy test and got placed on the demolition team. Now I may take 5-10 calls a day that take about 10 minutes max, and then requires me to fill out a 5-minute online form. I can't actually believe how easy my job is, and I cannot believe the amount of money I make for doing it. Story 56 made $150K plus bonus checks operating a natural gas treatment facility. It was literally me watching YouTube and reading books and napping. 7 days on, 7 off. Was always honestly thinking, I can't even believe I'm being paid to be here, and I was there 7 years. Story 57. My freshman year of high school, there was a girl who got a job at McDonald's. She was 15 or 16, and people would clown her. I would see her in the drive-thru for years, and eventually even I felt bad for her. I recently learned she worked her way up to management. McDonald's paid for schooling, eventually became an area manager, and now works for McDonald's corporate. She makes more than doctors, lawyers, you name it. Definitely the most successful person from our school. There is no shortcut or replacement for hard work. Story 58. Don't know if it's a bit of an urban myth, but I've heard about old school software engineers that know rare legacy languages that underpin banking infrastructure. That is under layers of newer stuff. They basically get paid big bucks just to go and attend to the legacy stuff when needed, as only a handful of these engineers are left. Story 59. I know someone who does air traffic control at a major airport that is only used for ambulance helicopters at night. He gets food delivered for free and is only allowed to work a few hours, so lots of breaks. During working hours, he sleeps in a sleeping bag he brings himself. When a helicopter comes in, an alarm rings, he asks them if they need assistance, which they never do, and leaves them to it. Before he leaves work, he gets breakfast delivered and earns $250K a year doing this a few nights a week. Unlike many other comments of people basically not doing their job, this actually is his job. He's encouraged to get as much rest, so he's sharp if anything does happen, and the limits are there for the same safety and liability reasons. However, becoming an air traffic controller is not easy by any means, and sponsored job positions are only given to the very best applicants. No experience is required, however, and it's a fully paid course. Story 60. The OR night shift crew. My charge nurse made over $110K a year working 3 nights a week and got so pissed when a case was added on at 11 p.m. and then complained for weeks. The other surgical assistant made more than I did when I worked the AM, and maybe he did 10, 20 cases a year while I easily did hundreds. Story 61. I earned $27K a year to play old school RuneScape in an office for 7 hours a day as an administrator for a global logistics and materials management, and spend about an hour tops per shift just inputting little snippets of information from paperwork the other folks in our warehouse hand me into our system. Pretty much zero effort, just a little time out of each day. Might not be a mive amount of money, but it's more than enough for my life and the way I spend my time as a 29-year-old single guy. I also walked into the job with zero experience as I'd been a chef and bartender for 13 years prior, and that was the entry-level pay bracket. I'm used to much, much harder work for much, much less pay due to my prior occupation. In terms of work done to money made, I imagine I'm in an extremely desirable spot. Certainly helps that I came in to fill the spot of two people who had been with the company for a long time and were being paid much more than my entry salary, and was able to do the job both of them had been doing for 20 years with one less body. Boss doesn't really care that I'm playing OSRS because I get the work done when it rolls in. Story 62. My sister and BIL used to live in Saudi. He was working for some rich oil guy who had multiple luxury mega yachts and had responsibility for ensuring they were all ready to go at a moment's notice. The guy would literally just turn up at the marina and want to go, but that would happen only about once a month. So as my BIL said, I get paid grotesquely well to do a few hours work when the boats come back from a trip and then sunbathe and read books for a month. Story 63 knew a medical evac pilot who often got to spend most of his time sitting around waiting for calls to come in. He'd go sometimes all week with at most one flight and spend the rest of the time surfing the net. Got paid damn good money to do it too. Just takes a lot of money and effort up front to get to that point though. Story 64. Not a real answer, but a funny story. I worked for a company that were contractors for the local utilities company. We took care of all the street lights for the utility company. For a while, I took calls and made reports when lights were out to be repaired. The utilities company took Good Friday off every year, but my company did not. Though it was unfair for us under the utility company to have a day off, but not the other workers. So once a year, 4 of us would sit in the empty utilities blue lighting, with the phones not turned on, and just read a book or surf the internet for a day with nothing to do. Story 65. It definitely is a director-level executive in any large corporation. Mostly speeches and talking to people in large audiences. The trick is, you really have to believe the bull you are saying, which is difficult with most unethical companies. Once we even had a director cry during a speech to show they cared. It was a nice touch. Well done. Not many would go to that length or depth of believability like George Costanza. They went on to embezzle the National Australian Postal Service by giving their staff expensive gifts like watches, etc. Story 66. I'm doing all right at the moment. My whiskey, wine, and cocktail knowledge has me basically working as a creative consultant for a hospitality group. I'm getting paid for very little labor but making the money. Be skilled where others aren't. And I don't mean some grand scheme. Be able to do things that other people can't day to day. They haven't realized that I became somebody reliable as a colleague by doing all the DIY maintenance in the bars when I was working there. Story 67. To generalize, people get paid in relation to the amount of value they create for customers/employers and their level of uniqueness in providing those services, which is why hedge fund managers and professional athletes make millions and fry cooks do not. If you aren't a talented athlete, then work with money, where the product you trade to the customer is money or a very liquid eat. Trade stocks, learn how to set lines for sports books, learn how to manage and market an online casino, get into the reinsurance business, lean how the most successful companies in these niches do what they do and copy them at first, and then continue to learn. Ideally, you want to be in a position where your investments are earning money while you sleep. Story 68. I've got a buddy who plans security camera placement for a large retailer. He makes a decent 6 figures, but since the buildings are all the same, he can basically place the cameras in the same places in all of the new builds, and minimally has to change placements in existing builds. He doesn't even have a boss right now. He said he works 10, 15 hours a week. I'm jealous. Story 69. Any mid-level manager with a competent team, handful of meetings a week, 2 hours lunches that you can get the company to pay for half the time. Just got to go with a client. Nearly 6 figures without counting overtime for just scheduling tasks. Only bad parts is how quickly a lower manager can screw this up. The constant lies about problems and solutions to keep upper management from stripping your team down to the minimum. The cloud of uncertainty that drugs and alcohol can bring to your day. A decade in industrial construction. Best job that can quickly become the worst. Story 70 jobs where you get paid for what you know and not for what you do. There are CIS admin jobs where you just sit and wait for things to break and then fix them. Some days, you'd go a full shift without incident. Other days, you're running around nonstop. Story 71. I once worked a job doing night shift at an IT service desk that sold 24/7 availability. We pretty much had no calls and no tickets most nights, so at like midnight, 3 a.m. and 6 a.m., I ran some basic checks to see if everything was still up and running. And for the rest of the night, I watched movies and played FIFA on my PlayStation. I was salaried, and the hours counted double, so I only had to work 3 nights a week and had the rest of the week off. One time a database server crashed at like 3 a.m. on a Saturday morning. It was completely dead, and I had to spend like the next 3 hours calling database admins and managers out of their beds. So that's basically the reason I was there in the first place, but 99% of the time it was the easiest job in the world. Story 72. I know a guy who does some complex troubleshooting of specialized engines. He doesn't have to do anything, ever, except he cannot be more than 2 hours from a major airport at any time. But if an engine beaks, it's all hands on deck 24/7 until repaired. He's paid very well. Story 73. I worked for a major company that bought out a competitor. I was on the team that did the merge. They refused to cooperate with us or attend meetings. I spent 2 years WFH hosting meetings that nobody attended before we just took their intellectual capital and fired them all. I made $150K/year for those 2 years, holding daily meetings alone and reporting up to management. Easiest job I ever had. Story 74. I am very well paid compared to what I actually do. I have 14 people who work for me who do the actual work. What we do is highly regulated, but the regulations can't cover every circumstance. I get paid to make decisions on the hard stuff and essentially sign my name to exceptions and workarounds. If I say the risk is acceptable and something bad happens anyway, the people involved get to point to me as the expert and say, we did what he said. Thing is, it took me 30 plus years to get to where I am. Story 75. Don't know exactly what she does, but the wife of a friend of mine gets hired by startup companies in SF and gets a cut when the founder sells the company on top of a salary hourly wage. She started working for a guy like in the 90s who would start companies, build them up for a few years, and then sell them. Now he recommends her for all kinds of startup companies. She makes like $100K a year and only works like 50% of the year. Story 76, a CEO who only deals with public representation. Your job is literally to change out with friends in public view now and then. You don't even need to use social media because most of the time a PR team will run your public account as long as you keep your personal one hidden. Hundreds of millions to literally eat at restaurants or play golf with friends and once in a blue mood, give a pre-written speech written by PR. Story 77. From what I hear, coding, web development, software engineers tend to work 15 hours a week and get paid full hours or 6+ figures a year. Seen many stories on Reddit where these guys will work 2 jobs from home and get $200K/year. Some will even try to do 3 jobs. I think you need a very specialized mindset. These people are very intelligent and generally seem a little bit on the spectrum to be able to focus on code. Story 78, I do plant maintenance, and aside from scheduled PMs, if everything is running and nothing breaks, you can kind of just hang out. You're an insurance policy for when does hit the fan, so you better be ready, but it pays really good. But they're paying you for the knowledge gained over years and the ability to quickly find solutions if needed, sometimes at 1 a.m. Story 79, if you're Miss or IT focused, basically anything with analyst in its title. Would know, am business analyst. Sometimes you start out working 30, 40 hours a week. But if you can move into process or upgrade maintenance and off of project work, you can slowly offload more and more work as it wraps up and just continue to act busy, and they won't IGN you new stuff. Basically, after taking a job, you can make it very low effort for yourself by design. Story 80. I make $200K as a contractor doing software consulting for the government. I'm a software engineer with a master's degree and am pretty good at solving big problems. I actually think I'm underpaid for what I deliver. But because the government moves pretty slowly and the stuff I'm working on impacts a large amount of people, the amount of work I actually can do in any given week is constrained. I'd say I'm working like 20 hours a week, but when I do deliver work, it's having a big impact, so it's still pretty motivating, fully remote as well. Story 81. Mob-related jobs, edgy, I work for the MBTA. Seems like guys who didn't rat in the 90s have jobs that they never have to show up for. They just get paid on paper and get benefits for keeping quiet. Coaching jobs, ultra-high net worth life or fitness coaches can just ask the same set of questions and provide the same set of instructions, then charge insane amounts while someone else does the work.